Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the On Track podcast. Thanks so much for joining us again this week. Once again, we have a lovely and relevant guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. Today, Colin Keogh joins us from Open Source Ventilator, which you've probably seen in social media and the news and so many other places. So hold on, put on your chin straps. We're going to have a great conversation. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Welcome to Altium's On Track podcast, where we talk to leaders about PCB design, tackling subjects ranging from schematic capture all the way to the manufacturing floor. I'm your host, Judy Warner. Please listen in every week and subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, and all your favorite podcast apps. And be sure to check out the show notes at altium.com/podcast, where you can find great resources and multiple ways to connect with us on social media.
Collaboration is critical to success. With us working remotely, it's more important than ever to convey design intent, review and comment, and iterate on mechanical, electrical, and software design features to get the perfect balance of user experience and form, all while improving manufacturing performance and yields. Working from anywhere and connecting with anyone has to be made easier. So at Altium, we're meeting the challenge head on. Right now, On Track podcast listeners have an exclusive, significant discount on Altium Designer with Altium 365 subscription. And to make this even easier, we're offering extended interest-free payment terms and a $400 bonus if you refer a collaborator so they get this deal too. So click the link below in the show notes to get your discount code now.
Well, hi, Colin. Thanks so much for joining us all the way across the pond in Dublin, Ireland.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you. I know you're a very busy guy, but as you know, through Dugan Karnazes in Michigan, we got sort of a front row seat to Open Source Ventilator, and we're happy to provide the design tools to help with the electronics part of one of those designs. So why don't you start off first by telling us a little bit about you, your background, and then we'll jump into finding out more about Open Source Ventilator.
Sure. So I'm an engineer by birth nearly. So my father was an auto mechanic. So I spent my whole life in an automotive garage fixing cars, and have always been exposed to engineering, technology and repair, that sort of stuff. So was a natural born engineer. So I did an undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering, then a master's degree in renewable energy systems, and then I've just finished a PhD in innovation methodologies. So I've been exposed to engineering problems since I was 4 or 5 years old. So I kind of continued on that professional approach. And since then, I've been working in a number of different roles. I set up a non-profit called the Rapid Foundation, which uses 3D printers for overseas development. I run an innovation consultancy called Sapien Innovation. We do global innovation training. And I've worked with a number of startup companies, and I spend most of my time as a research engineer in a university here in Dublin looking at technology and engineering.
Wow, other than that, you're not busy.
No.
No grass grown under your feet. Well, congratulations on your PhD. And, I always say here that engineers are born, not made. I swear you guys come with the gene. So why don't you tell us about how Open Source Ventilator got started, what inspired it, and really what the impetus was for getting this off the ground?
Sure. So it came about in a time of madness, like the whole world was, around the 14th or 15th of March. COVID was just biting in the US and in Europe, and it would travel around the world, and it caused an awful lot of shock and fear, and then lockdowns as well. So the world was plunged into a situation in which it had not been in for a very long time before. So it resulted in an awful lot of people wanting to help and contribute, but not having a mechanism to do so. So I was tagged on a Facebook post is where it all started. And I was tagged on a Facebook group post to a group started in Silicon Valley by a guy called Guy Cavalcanti, and at that stage it was the open source ventilator group on Facebook. So I joined that group. I promoted it heavily because I had some experience in doing these remote open source projects before. And over 24 hours, the kind of growth in the project had exploded. And in doing so, an awful lot of locations and companies and people locally to me here in Ireland reached out to me and said, look, I think we can do something on a more focused level here in Ireland. Can we set up something here? So that's instigated the setting up of Open Source Ventilator. So what I did is I set it up with two very good friends of mine. Conal Laverty, he runs an IoT company based in Dublin called WIA, and David Pollard, who is an innovation manager for a disability care organisation here in Ireland, and he runs my Sapien Innovation Company with me. The three of us sent an innocuous WhatsApp message, and then in the space of 2 weeks, I think we had over 4,000 expressions of interest. We had a couple of thousand people working online on Slack channels and on focus groups trying to develop. At that stage, it was open source ventilators, but very, very quickly, a whole other range of necessary medical requirements were present. So two of the people in our group, Gillian Berry and Dr. Roisin Lyons, they decided to kind of set up another arm, and that other arm is called OSVX. And for the last couple of weeks, they've been working on developing face shields, face masks, education guides, anything and everything related to COVID intervention. So within the space of a couple of weeks, the joke is we set up an enterprise scale organization made fully of volunteers spread remotely around the world. And I think of everyone that's contributed, I probably know less than 1% of them or have met them 1% in person. So it was a complete shift in normality. And it's been working quite well so far. And we've had significant kind of impacts to help people fight COVID. So we're delighted with the progress so far.
It's amazing. I know when we were talking to Dugan, I think he got involved early on, and I like what he said. He said, I put my name out there, much like you said, on the Facebook group, and he said, I laid down a brick and I came back and there was a wall.
That's a very, very good one. Yeah, and Dugan and the guys in Velocity are one of those bricks in particular. How we managed to get connected with companies spread around the world and how willing they were to take part and support and offer all of their expertise is just, it's amazing how everyone wanted and was immediately open to working together to kind of solve this problem. So yeah, it's exactly, yeah, we laid a brick and a whole house was built over the space of a week.
I really like what you said too, like an enterprise level. You know, you think about a startup or scaling a whatever, and you guys did it with Slack and some cloud-based tools. And, you know, in the case of Dugan, just because I know him, right, that a guy, an innovator, a mechanical engineer from Dublin would end up working with a guy from Grand Rapids, Michigan, like at the speed of light.
It's crazy. And the stories, there's numerous stories like that. Some of the conversations we've been having over the last few weeks, I kind of pinched myself in them to say, these can't be real. You know, we've been advising science and technology ministries in South American countries. We've worked with like Fortune 100 companies. You know, we've been advising refugee camps in kind of Southeast Asia. The conversations are crazy. And this like really showed that during COVID, this idea of open source collaboration has never really been proven as strongly as it has now at the minute.
Well, I call these moments, you know, as part of this crisis, while everyone's devastated by, you know, the shape that our world is in, I call these COVID silver linings, right? Who knew, right? That it's not just the big, in fact, the big Fortune 100 companies of the world in some way, they move slow, right? And so the agility that a collaborative open source team could come to bear at this time has really been touching. And it'll be interesting to see all these stories shake out, Colin, because I would love to hear them all. I love stories. I love to see how these pieces come together. And I'm eager to see if the stories could be put together.
Exactly, yeah. And it's something that we're like, I'm super interested in as well. So like professionally, my research has been in this space of innovation and open innovation and everything. So I know for an awful long time afterwards, I'm going to be studying this global kind of COVID intervention to see what worked, what didn't. But as you said, like silver linings, it is a terrible situation and a terrible disease and a terrible virus, but there will be very, very significantly good things that will arise from it. You know what I mean? I'm convinced that communities will be closer to each other than before. People will evaluate what is important in their lives, but also it will present a situation in which an open source intervention via non-standard channels can be taken as seriously as a government-led intervention. It's like we're right up there with some world governments trying to do the same thing, and in lots of cases doing better than they are.
Well, to me, it's interesting because you and I were talking ahead of time, is that open source projects and innovation is one of those things that has sort of been on the fringes, right? It's somewhere between makers, hobbyists, and professional. You're kind of in the middle, but definitely on the fringes of what we consider as professional, right? Engineering. But because the speed at which you can innovate, it really is interesting, again, to see you working with Fortune 100. They're looking to you for answers, right? Because of the agility, because of the tools. And I also think people that are involved in this group, a lot of them are more along the ages of you or Dugan, and you guys have grown up with software, the internet, all these things. And some of the older engineers or older people like moi, we didn't grow up. Those tools in the cloud and some of these things are not native to us, right? You have mad skills with 3D printers, but the people that are a little bit older, I think this is really shining a light on what young engineers are bringing to the table.
Technology and the experience that the young engineers are bringing are very, very relevant. And even then, like the kind of, to borrow a phrase from Y Combinator, the fail fast and break things kind of idea, that we've kind of grown up with that sort of just try it. If it doesn't work, you try it again. And that's one side of what's required. But the other side of what's required is experience. It is the ventilators and these healthcare interventions and any sort of traditional engineering intervention. Regulation is important. Structure is important. Like a logical methodology is very, very important. So both sides, the fail fast and break things of new technology, but also then the order and the experience of having people that have delivered these complex projects before that can stay the course and help advise. So it is a real intermingling of worlds, both age, location, skill level, and then expertise. So in our group, we have medical doctors, we have engineers, we have computer scientists, graphic artists, anyone and everyone. Their skills are required in some way, and we just encourage them to and have been encouraging them to join in, find a project in which they can contribute to it, and then just get it out in the world to help. So unfortunately, well, it can be a good or bad thing in most cases. Is COVID is here now. It is not here in 6 months' time. Well, we hope it's not here in 6 months' time. So the interventions we need them quickly. So you know what I mean? The perfect is the enemy of done, I think, is the statement as well. So, they need to be functional, they need to be safe, but they also need to be out into the world. And that's kind of what we've been balancing between the kind of new innovation and then the old kind of technology and kind of corporate approach. So we've got that mix, I think, quite well.
Well, I do too. And I really believe in that having the old school experts and the young innovators together. I think there's so much value there. It's something I try to do. I try to find the young innovators and hook them up with people that I know that are, authors, and, they have all their battle scars but they have a lot to share. And I think we're foolish, to have this war between, say, millennials and boomers. I don't think that's a workable model. And both sides are really needed, and both have so much to learn from each other, right? And so, you mentioned having a Slack channel and going from, Facebook group to 4,000 people. What were the challenges in coordinating that size of a group that went to that crazy scale overnight?
It was difficult. And like, if there was anything looking back that I think we could do better on, it is that coordination. Again, a lot of the problem came from the speed, the external urgency. So when we started on the ventilator, the whole world was saying we need lots of these as fast as humanly possible. So that was a huge amount of external pressure. And then, the group was formed in an ad hoc basis. We didn't really know who anyone was. We didn't know their skills. We didn't know their expertise, their time commitment. Some countries were in lockdown, others weren't yet. Some people were working, some people were furloughed. We didn't know. There was so much uncertainty. So it took us a good couple of weeks to try and find something that works. So, you know what I mean? Slack was the place we went to, first of all. And Slack is a great channel, and it's a great mechanism for companies to work workflows on. But it can be quite difficult when you're trying to onboard people that don't understand it, or people that constantly want to add their own channels. Very quickly, you can go from 50 channels to 5,000 channels, and everything can get lost in the noise. So Slack was quite good. We used all video conferencing software like Zoom and everything along them lines to try and replicate the face-to-face interaction of just discussing a problem out and iterating it together. And then we used loads of other kind of digital platforms, Altium being one, and on these new forms of co-collaborative technology tools, like we used them as well. And as well as it has worked, it still really couldn't take away from the fact that I'm an engineer and I couldn't get access to my workshop, which killed me. You know what I mean? I wanted to build things. So you still, if we could do it again, what I would have said is we would have put more focus on the in-person work we could have done at the earliest of stages before the lockdowns came. So, we could have accelerated progress by doing all of in-person ideation and development as quickly as possible before the lockdowns came, and that got way more difficult. So yeah, I think there's going to be a whole new suite of collaborative co-working tools that will arrive from this and arrive from COVID in particular. Probably just stitching together the elements that other people have worked on together. The video calling and your Slack channel and your notation board and your ideation tool all in the one location. So it worked. It definitely could have been better. And I think everyone that's involved in the project would agree it could have been better. But it worked. We've produced something. We've contributed to a grand body of knowledge, and we've helped kind of accelerate this idea of developing these ventilators and other medical devices, that will help people now, basically, as soon as possible.
So I understand that what was happening in this group is there were several parallel designs, right? It was a race to get X amount of viable ventilators or medical projects out there. Do you have any sense of how many designs there are? Did you divide up the mechanical and electrical? How did you sort that out?
So yeah, but due to the speed, we really did a normal medical device design process on its head. Normally you'd set regulation, you'd set a plan, you'd set a target design specification, and you'd work towards that. Whereas we had this, the pressure or the external pressure was so great, it was just solutions were required. So there was numerous teams developing numerous designs before even regulations had been set. So, there was a document by the UK government that set out the design regulations that an awful lot of people were following. Now, it subsequently turned out to be significantly below what was required, which is a problem with the open source thing, but we can kind of hopefully fix that the next time. But so from the ventilator side, and in all of these interventions, there were numerous teams working on numerous different designs. I think the ventilator design, we got up to one stage of having, in total there was 17 different concepts. And what was happening was they were being constantly iterated, develop a design, iterate it, and retire it if it didn't work, and move on to the next one. So I think now at the minute with the guys OpenLung in Canada, we're our main design partners, and the guys at OpenLung are amazing at just iterating these designs. They've made their GitLab open for everyone to use as a repository. So I think at the minute there's about 5 leading designs there, which teams like Dugan's team and other teams around the world are working on these different interventions with the goal of producing validated data from one of these machines. So I know there's an awful lot of designs, and people have seen them in the media, of these kind of open source ventilators that have got FDA exceptional use authorization. But it's our perspective that there are still a significant lack of validated output tests from these things. And what we want to do is we've not ignored the fact it's a medical device. So if it isn't proven to, one, be useful, and then two, be safe, we're not going to release them. That's the paramount priority. It has to help people, it has to support medical practitioners, and it has to do it safely. So that's kind of our approach, was develop the concepts, prove the base functionality, and then add on the complicated elements afterwards. So that's the kind of approach we're going with, and we're still going with now at the minute.
Well, I think it's easy for everyone, right, to get hyper-focused in sort of our own little neighborhood, right, quote unquote. For me, it's America. For you, it might be Europe or Ireland, right? Because those are the problems closest to home, right? But, with Dugan, I saw him develop this thing, right? Kind of had a front row seat and seeing the weekly progress. At one time early on, Michigan was, 5-10 days away from being completely out of ventilators, a lot of fear. That resolved pretty quickly in a week or two. But then here at Altium, I have a coworker on the other side of the country who is from Ethiopia. Well, then I heard from a coworker, he had a perspective that he wanted to help his home country. Yep. And then he mentioned, I think he said something like, I don't know, their population is massive, right? And they only had like a very limited number of ventilators for the whole country. So even though I feel like some of that external pressure, is expiring in some areas, an area like Africa, or second or third world countries that still don't have access, like we're not out of the woods. No. How do you keep that in front of you? And what are sort of the hot spots you have from your seat? Because you probably have a much broader one. And the viability of, because these are really now emergency ventilators, right? And boy, in a crunch, an emergency ventilator or any medical device is a good thing. So where are the hot spots? Where do you see actual viability? You've basically mapped exactly the development that all of the teams have been working with over the last kind of 5 weeks. So people have a tendency to want to solve the problem that's outside their window. It's human nature. It's perfectly understandable. But as you said, the kind of Western world anyway seems to have managed to control the spread. A lot of places are plateauing so that urgency is gone. And even in an awful lot of developed countries, the medical protocols around treating COVID, as they learn more information, are moving away from mechanical ventilation, which is great from a Western perspective. But as you said, the developing world is where the problem is going to be. South America, Africa, some of the less developed regions of Southeast Asia, these countries do not have the financial capacity or the well-developed healthcare systems that we do have in the West. And so, if it really takes off there, these emergency-based ventilators will be massively required. So that fact has adapted and changed how we operated. So from the very beginning, we were adamant that we were going to be as open source as humanly possible. With the GitLab, everyone can follow the development of the designs. The Slack channel is open. I think there's one private channel, and that's just to make sure we can run the Slack. And, apart from that, everything is open. The designs were freely shared and iterated, and we were willing to help any team that was working on similar. So our goal was to create an open source ventilator. We did not care whose design it was. We did not care where it came from. Once it was safe and it worked, we were willing to support that team to get it done. That was our kind of driver. So that has kind of meant now that as the problem moves to the developed regions, I think the provision of information is going to be very, very important. So, is a team in the US can regulate under the FDA, but they don't really know how to regulate in Argentina or regulate in South Africa. The same for Ireland. We could regulate in Ireland. And again, we don't know how to regulate in other countries. And even though these regulators were very, very open at the beginning, I perfectly understand the fact that they now have to reduce their requirements and their flexibility in regulation. The FDA, its job is to regulate for the US. So if they're not required in the US, I fully understand if they're hesitant about regulating it for a country that they don't operate in. So,
Yeah, so I think how open the teams are and how they provide the information to other people is going to be very, very important, and how they support these developing regions into kind of developing these emergency ventilators. But as you said, they're emergency. Like very early on, I'd said, and we still believe it, I never want these to be used by anybody anywhere. You know what I mean? I don't. I want the situation to be there that they're not necessary. But if they are necessary, I'd like there to be something there, because something is better than nothing.
Well, you bring up a good point. When we think about developing a product in a traditional way, the goal is the project and then revenue that will follow, revenue opportunities that follow. In this case, you hope they aren't used. And it would be easy to dismiss that, like, why did we do all that? So what? But I think there's been like a tectonic shift, right? In the way, again, open source has gone now in this situation as being in the fringes, and like, again, going back to Dugan, all of a sudden Dugan is talking to Ford, who's talking to the federal government. Like, all of a sudden you guys have a front row seat, and actually experts are reaching out to you. Can you tell us about some of the conversations you've had? And then I want to follow that up with to say, what long-term impact do you think this may have on medical device development?
Sure. Yeah. So similar to Dugan as well, is we've been in discussions with Ford, with Velocity as well. So, every couple of days we had a phone call and we update each other and we share lessons learned and that sort of stuff. So, yeah, it's kind of open source beforehand. So open source software was very, very common. That's been around for a long time. I'd be surprised if you and I both haven't used some software today that came from an open source origin. Very common. Hardware, less so. So, from my background in 3D printing, I've worked with Enable. So Enable do open source 3D printed prosthetic hands. So the designer of that, Ivan Owen, is a very good friend of mine, and he's been advising us as we go. That gained an awful lot of attention, but the application was quite niche, making prosthetic hands for children. There wasn't a huge volume. It didn't touch everybody. Whereas in this case, COVID touched everybody suddenly and immediately. So there was a huge interest. Everyone was incentivized to try and tackle this problem. So what that kind of meant was we were having conversations with companies we would never imagine. So very early on, we had design discussions and support from Amazon's hardware division in San Francisco, from the Ford engineering team in Detroit, from PCH International in Asia. We had regular conversations with groups like the FDA and the World Health Organization, and these large kind of global organizations and brands that had valued the speed at which we could iterate, and they valued the fact that everyone was working in a field they were not familiar with. So sharing all of the information and lessons learned as quickly as possible meant that everyone will get there quicker. So that was a kind of real nice shift towards it. And then I think what happened was it gave open source a bigger platform than it's ever had before. These were ragtag bunches of self-assembled people scattered around the world, sitting at the main table with World Health Organizations, like large government bodies and large Fortune 100 companies, and everyone was sharing openly. So I think going forward that the position of open source projects, and in particular open source hardware, has been significantly elevated. And I think the whole idea of open source interventions now is justified more than ever to be able to react to these sudden emergency situations. So COVID will pass. It's inevitable we'll have some other form of pandemic. It could be a hurricane, it could be an earthquake, it could be civil unrest, it could be anything that will cause the next emergency. And I think now this online connected ability to generate these open source ideas super quickly can be there to help add to one of the solutions to whatever these problems are in the future.
Altium, just give you a little glimpse of what we've been up to. Just coincidentally, this was not a plan, but we had been sitting on Altium 365, which is a platform, and Altium Designer sits on top of it in Concord Pro, which is the component management. We were going to release it, to the public. We'd already run through beta and all that. And we decided to, release it to the public right now, or, in this time frame. It just so happened we had a global pandemic at the same time. And it has been an absolute honor and privilege, right, to become part of that story and see in such a profound way how Altium 365 enabled the speed. It was stunning to watch, to see them spin up this design flow in 24 hours. And to me, the rock stars are the designers. Our tool just happened to be particularly relevant. I think it's relevant regardless, but it had to be particularly relevant at this time. And I'm thinking, our lucky stars. It's been really, really fun, to be part of that, where this like unbridled innovation, that wasn't hindered by regulation, competition, capitalism, where everybody's hiding their cards, right? And to go, oh my gosh, look what these men and women can do, when we blow up, which is what open source does, right? It blows up all the barriers, and the speed at which things moved is just stunning, and to have, like you said, those tier one companies. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how many other world problems can we solve if we work like this?
It's a very, very interesting dynamic going forward is, you have all of these people committed and making huge strides on this global issue, but there is numerous global issues that everyone faces every day.
Every day.
People could solve these problems as well. And I know it's going to take a while for some people to get used to it, because like personally, I'm in the same spot you guys are. I love this sort of thing. I love global, really large scale, complex problems. Like, I'm a born engineer. I love solving complicated things. So no matter how complicated they are, I like them. So I think over this experience, and with so many kind of tier ones and governments and kind of non-experts contributing to it, I think everyone is going to be an awful lot more familiar and open to this super fast reactionary approach. So hopefully when we have the next problem, people will be an awful lot more familiar and open to this new way of solving them when everyone does come together to kind of tackle these issues.
So from your perspective, Colin, what do you think? One, do you think there's going to be permanent change, sort of following on your last comments, permanent change specifically to the development of medical devices? I mean, I think this has application across the board. Do you think there'll be any lasting implications for that?
So I think there will. Well, the limit of, there is a limit on how much they should change. Like, the regulations are there to keep everyone safe. These are medical devices, super important. But I think the whole idea around how long the process takes to develop a medical device, and how quick and kind of agile you can be, and how diverse your influences into that development project can be, I think that'll definitely change. And there'll be we will see that when eventually we get a vaccine. It wouldn't surprise me if all records in vaccine development get broken this time, because here is a solution. So I think the speed and the external draw of information for medical devices, I hope that will stay. And like the field will adapt to taking these kind of diverse, different inputs to create the process in a quicker way they've ever done before.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. So we're going to start winding down, but I wanted your perspective, because I know you've had a really sort of unique seat in the world through this. What was your perception early on about the impact of COVID-19 overall, like how it was impacting the world, how this was shaking out, and how engineers were able to come to bear, right, in face of these specific problems?
Yeah. Well, I think in that case, the main outcome for me was, or my main insight was, how quickly everything was changing. Everything we knew was changing. All of the assumptions were lasting 24 hours at most. It started originally when the crisis first hit. It was, we need as many ventilators as possible now. Medical device companies can't make them. Let's get Ford to make them. Let's get everyone to make them. And then people took time to learn. So, you know what I mean? The reactionary nature of people makes sense, but also you need to do the studies and you need to learn the information. So that kind of happened then too. And I think that's continuing with COVID everywhere. You know, the whole world and the whole Western world was expecting these huge kind of peaks, which thankfully most of the governments and healthcare systems managed to control. So, like, I just hope then people realize that, yeah, it's going to be drawn out to keep people safe. So, you know what I mean? You have to have patience. So, despite the fact everyone wants to react immediately and solve the problem immediately, an awful lot of times you do need patience. You need to just stay the course, stay committed, focus your teams on what you want to do, and then get a usable long-term output come from it. So, you know what I mean? Even if all of the teams that are working on these ventilators, if they crack the problem and they're never used for COVID, they can be used again in the future. You know what I mean? They can be there for the next time they're required. They can be there for the natural disasters. They can be there for the wars. They can be there for the refugee migrations. So, you know what I mean? Despite the fact that we've all been given this huge amount of external fuel and pressure, all of the outcomes from it will still be used for something else. So, I mean, this is just a temporary blip on the kind of business as usual. But I think when we go back to business as usual, it'll be the same, but kind of improved with more openness and more speed and more acceptance to having non-standard inputs to these sorts of things.
I love it. I sure hope so. And that's an interesting perspective to think of refugees, wars, like, you know, there are other situations besides a global pandemic in which these will come to bear. And, you know, I think to your point, the real goal that's going to linger is these processes, these collaborations, these relations between open source and tier one, you know. And so, I mean, the whole world is obviously going to change, but, and we won't know till it's over. I mean, who could imagine, for instance, what would happen to airports, you know, post 9/11, right? It utterly shifted, you know, the way we did a lot of things, but specifically I think about airports. For our listeners, I just want to let you know, Colin has a really interesting TED Talk, and I'm going to share that below as well as his website. So please go, you know, listen to his TED Talk, jump onto his website. Colin, share what that website is. I'll throw it in the show notes, but just for those who are maybe listening and driving.
It is teamosv.com. So TEAMOSV.com.
Thank you. Any additional thoughts, Colin, as we wrap up here? This has been a fascinating conversation, and you know, go you and everybody else that's been part of this initiative. It has been just phenomenal to watch.
No, I think, like, to me, the most important bit is all of the people that volunteered their time. Like, so, you know, it's like we were just an organizer along the top and helping people do all of the actual meaningful impact as a whole. So, you know, hundreds or thousands of people have contributed to these sorts of projects. They're all going to commit their own little piece to solving this problem, and everything they do is going to help save people's lives around the world. So I think that, yeah, they deserve all of the credit. Everyone that's volunteered, everyone that's offered support, everyone that's extended any form of support to the project as a whole, the credit's solely theirs. They deserve it all.
I agree. I've been saying all along, and the way barriers have broken down, as you've said several times today, has been just phenomenal to watch. And I'm excited going forward to see what kind of fundamental shifts will happen, because I just see, wow, if we just put the right tools in the hands of the right people, right, how this could change the world for good on a lot of different levels. So I'm so excited about your work. Thanks so much. I know you are like so busy, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and share your story and
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been a delight. So hopefully we'll have you on again, Colin, when you have more updates. I'm sure we're going to hear more from you shortly. Oh, and the other thing I would love to do with you, I saw your development of the open source hand for the little girl, and
Yes.
I love that story, and we like to highlight stories like that. So maybe another time we can talk about that, or whatever pet project you're working on.
I'd love to. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. To our listeners, thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation with Colin Keogh, and we will see you next time. Until then, stay healthy, stay safe, and remember to always stay on track.